All right, ladies and gentlemen, how are you doing? It's Saturday, January 4th, 2020. Welcome to another episode of Music of Destruction right here on YouTube and my first video of the new year. Happy New Year, everyone, and I hope you had a safe and happy holiday season, and I wish you the best in 2020. Alright, so tonight I am reviewing another death metal album from my personal collection for you guys. And tonight we are having a look at Skinless Trample the Weak, Hurdle the Dead. Now, Skinless have been around since 1992 and started off as Gorebag and changed their name to Skinless later that same year. Now, the band hails from Glensfall, New York, and were one of the first bands in the second wave of death metal. In the 90s, both the New York death metal scene and the Florida death metal scene were gaining extensive popularity. Now, the lineup on this album is as follows. We have Jason Kieser on vocals, Noah Carpenter on guitars, Joe Kieser on bass, Bob Bulak on the drums. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the bell for all notifications. I would appreciate it. If you want to join our Facebook group, go to facebook.com/groups/music of destruction. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, search Music of Destruction. If you want to get access to exclusive content by supporting the channel through Patreon, then go to patreon.com/Music of Destruction. My newest podcast series is up right now. The Seed, episode number 16, The History of Black Sabbath, part 1, is up there right now for you guys. Part 2 will be up January 21st, so make sure you check out all my podcasts if you're a patron, and thank you so much for your support. Also, make sure you check out my buddy Anthony's channel, Heavy Metal Networks. These guys are also in the band Diabolic Intent. They're from Florida. They play old school death metal, just a great group of guys. And I'm going to be interviewing them as well as reviewing their upcoming album, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Also going to be featured on their podcast series, The Dirt, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much to Anthony, Chris, and Mop for that wonderful opportunity, and I really, really appreciate it. The album opens with a spoken sample that says, "From this day, my people will crouch and conspire and plot and plan for the inevitable day of man's downfall. The day when he finally turns his weapons against his own kind, when cities lay buried underneath radioactive rubble, when the sea is a dead sea and the land is a wasteland, and that day is upon you now." This pretty much sets the tone before it literally assaults you and all of your senses with the track Overlord, which then offers up putrid, vile, disgusting, filth-ridden riffing, bass, and absolutely devastatingly brutal drumming. Vocals sound like a maniac caged in absolute rage that drives itself like a hammer and nails into your skull as the guitars grind you into a fucking piece of a bloodied heap lying on the floor. I mean, that's literally what it does. It is pretty easy to see where Slam got its influences from, but make no mistake, this is not a Slam album in any sense of the word. This is just straight up brutal death metal done right, in my opinion, with no trendy bullshit. Lyrically and emotionally, Overlord is all about a war-torn psyche that is driven by nothing but brutality and violence, cruelty and death, and of course the track sounds exactly like this because the music matches the lyrical content perfectly, and the delivery and execution on this track really makes you feel that atmosphere of being in an apocalyptic war with, you know, all the other emphasis on that. Killer opener here, guys. Next up is Unilateral Disgust, which opens with a bit more of a slower tempo with riffs steeped in low-tuned groove, but still inflicts deep wounds of destruction and violent atrocities as only Skinless can deliver here, ladies and gentlemen. There are still plenty of relentlessly heavy tempos on this one with some insane double bass and blast beats to break your neck for sure. The vocals are rather standard for this style and are not that out of the ordinary for me. I do enjoy the vocals, but they aren't really anything special. But they do what they need to do for the music that is proudly being displayed here. Brutal and uncompromising in its approach and direction, this is another absolute beast of a song that has some really awesome groove as well, and I really dig it a lot. Now, lyrically and emotionally, this one is all about self-destruction and mass suicide, and a plague-ridden virus that is bent on destroying any semblance of hope for the human race. Pretty damn killer song here as well. Next up, we have Deviation Will Not Be Tolerated, and I immediately fell in love with this track because of its slower tempo and not being so focused on speed. Though it's still brutal as hell and actually manages to create some war-torn climax of fields of charred bodies and the stench of death hanging thick in the air, but one that almost serves as a swan song to a war ending, and the atmosphere conveys this quite well. However, the song then shifts into a really brutal pace with that double bass pummeling you in the skull, once again like 1,000 tanks, steamrolling and annihilating all traces of the world around you. This is easily one of my favorite tracks on the album, and the guitars, bass, and drumming literally force you through a meat grinder and render you into a pile of bloody meat, bones, and blood. Perfect song here, and yes, this is one of my favorites because lyrically and emotionally it's all about obeying the command of war and all of its indoctrinations, but also coming to terms with a psychotic breakdown one would endure during this entire experience of being in a war that is so insane that it systematically breaks down all of your reasoning capacities and choices to possibly adhere to a more desired moral compass, so to speak. At least that's how I feel. Killer song here as well. Next up, we have the title track, Trample the Weak, Hurdle the Dead. And again, more of that insanely brutal, gut-wrenching blasting and insane guitar, chunky meat-grinding riffing that reminds you that this album is taking no prisoners. And rightfully so. This is, after all, brutal death metal. I will once again reiterate that bands in this genre are constantly being ripped off in this day and age, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. And the reason I say this is because everything that's come after this surge of second wave death metal, for the most part, has been nothing but imitated and hasn't really innovated jack shit, in my humble opinion. But I digress, because this is one of the bands in the BDM genre that are doing it justice and serving the right purpose for this genre with their contributions to it. This is another insane classic track here, and the emotions and lyrical themes for me conjure up images of extreme warfare and the aftermath of the use of deadly chemicals and other human destructive tools to annihilate the enemy. This is easily the heaviest song on the album, and you will really love this if you love your BDM uncompromisingly fast and brutal. This is an absolute gut-ripping entrails displaying track that will not let up on pummeling you into a bloodied, battered heap of shit, so to speak. So guys, let's listen to this monster right now on Music of Destruction with Trample the Weak.
We're not just going to shoot the bastard. We're going to cut out their living guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks. We're going to murder those bastards by the bushel.
And we are back, and yes, this is pure, brutal, meat-grinding, filthy, disgusting death metal. The fucking way that it should be done, in my opinion, without trendy breakdowns and childish, stupid lyrics like so many bands of today emphasize and celebrate using. Next up, we have Spills of the Psychophant, and some more of that brutal insanity that the album opened with makes another appearance here. Though this one-of-a-kind kind of mixes that slower groove with the absolute mind-bending and skull-crushing brutality of the earlier tracks is quite refreshing, though this one has a slightly more technical feel to it in my opinion, as there is a bit more riff variety being offered up on this one, but it also has super fast tempos and an absolute visceral delivery in its pacing that really make you forget that there were any slower moments on the album to begin with, and kind of serves as a contrast to the various themes and ideas being explored and applied on the album. The double bass and blasting isn't constant either, and it's utilized nicely and implemented only where it needs to be. Yes, most of this album is just flat out brutality, but it also has some groovier moments that give it a sense of flow and that melodic pacing that gives it a much needed sense of variety and overall makes the brutality that much more effective. Lyrically and emotionally, this one explores a deep fascination and obsession with war and death, but also violence and extreme ideology that's being talked about here. Another killer song here as well. Next up, we have the track End Vision, and it starts off with a slower, doom-laden crawl for a brief period before it explodes into a full-on brutality and savage assault. The drumming, bass, and guitars are relentless in their approach and impact on your mind and soul. By now, however, the album has become quite formulaic and doesn't really give you anything to write home about at this point, so to speak. And while this album thus far has intrigued me and kept me very captivated, these last two tracks aren't really anything different from the rest of the album in my opinion. The track execution of Region follows suit once again and keeps the brutality running strong, and the instrumentation and precision delivered here is incredible. But the problem with this genre is that it becomes incredibly predictable, formulaic, and boring if an album goes on for too long. And in my opinion, it makes repeated listenings highly unlikely, but if it sits around for a while, you will want to spin it again. Now, for some people who like their metal rather predictable and formulaic, as just something that's brutal for the sake of brutality, even though the band manages to carry out a consistent theme, it still kind of wears thin on me, and by the 7th track, I'm already bored of the album. Plus, the tireless, almost pig-like grunts really get on my nerves as well by this time throughout the album. And I mean, sure, for the first couple of songs, having those pig grunts is okay, but when you use them over and over again, it gets rather irritating, and that's just how I look at it, guys. I mean, yes, there is a lot of hatred and disgust that comes from this record, no doubt, but I feel like this concept could have created a lot more variety on the album, rather than just, hey, let's see how brutal we can be and crank it up to 11. I mean, come on, guys, that just borders on being contrived, in my opinion. Anyways, one thing I will note is that the album closes with a cover of Black Sabbath's Wicked World, which is definitely a great cover, and Skinless did do a hell of a job with this cover, guys. And now we come to the final verdict for Skinless Trample the Weak, Hurdle the Dead, and I'm going to score this a 7.5 out of 10. It's a good album and everything, but those vocals are what I'm really not super crazy about, as they sound really generic, and they end up becoming formulaic and predictable. And this album probably would have served itself better if it was a 6-song album rather than 8 tracks. As I said, those last 2 songs before the cover kind of wear thin, and those pig-like grunts just get really fucking annoying. I don't know, that's just how I feel about it. You might not agree, you might love this album and give it a 10 out of 10. That's fine. I want to give some shout-outs to some great friends of mine, Shadows of Death Records. We're going to be doing an interview with Unleashed tomorrow right here on the channel. Sunday, January the 5th, 2020. Unleashed will be on Music of Destruction, so I'm very, very thrilled for that. Also, on Monday, I'm going to be doing an interview with Gale and Sagrado, the newest band that he signed from the Philippines, so that's going to be awesome. Another video will be coming up this Tuesday. Make sure you subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Also, a shout out to Acid Metal, Backwoods Metal, my friend King of Swords as well. Have yourselves an awesome night, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.